This is too stupid even for him. Those are the words of Donald Trump's niece, Mary Trump, in her social media reaction to Donald Trump's latest proof that he is unfit to serve as president of the United States. Mary Trump was reacting to Donald Trump's social media post of a message to the Prime Minister of Norway, in which Donald Trump, in what appears to be more evidence of cognitive decline, possibly cognitive collapse, says that because the country of Norway did not give him the Nobel Peace Prize, even though the country of Norway has nothing to do with choosing Nobel Prize winners, Donald Trump is now.
We begin tonight with what may be one of the most revealing moments yet in Donald Trump's second presidency. His own niece, Mary Trump, has issued a blistering assessment of the former and current president's latest communication, describing it in stark terms as being, quote, too stupid for even him. What provoked this extraordinary family rebuke? A social media message directed at Norway's prime minister that has left diplomatic observers, constitutional scholars, and even members of Trump's own party struggling to explain what they're witnessing. The document in question purports to connect two entirely unrelated matters: Trump's long-standing grievance over never receiving the Nobel Peace Prize and his renewed threats to somehow acquire Greenland from Denmark. But here's where the situation moves from merely controversial into genuinely alarming territory. The message appears to demonstrate a fundamental confusion about basic European geography and governmental structures. Donald Trump's communication blames the country of Norway for not awarding him the Nobel Peace Prize. There's just one rather significant problem with that accusation. Norway as a nation has absolutely no role in selecting Nobel Prize recipients. The Norwegian Nobel Committee, while based in Oslo, operates independently of the Norwegian government. This isn't some obscure procedural detail. It's fundamental information that any world leader engaging in international diplomacy should understand. But the geographic confusion may run even deeper. Trump is simultaneously threatening action against Greenland, which is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, not Norway. These are two separate sovereign nations with distinct governments, languages, and histories. Yet Trump's communication appears to conflate them, or, at minimum, fails to distinguish between them in any coherent way. This raises uncomfortable questions. Has Donald Trump never understood that Norway and Denmark are different countries? Is it possible he believes Denmark is simply a city within Norway, or perhaps the reverse? Or is something more troubling happening here? A deterioration in cognitive function that is erasing previously held knowledge.
The Greenland thing is, and always has been, a Trump diversionary tactic. Trump is no more serious about it now than he was the first time he mentioned it over 6 years ago. 6 years from now, Donald Trump will have done nothing. Donald Trump is never going to do anything in Greenland. He's not going to buy the place. He's not going to invade the place. But he is going to talk about Greenland every day that he can, because the American news media cannot resist saturation coverage of such a simple issue. And every bit of coverage of Greenland is not coverage of the Epstein files, as we will be covering tonight. More than 99% of the Epstein files Donald Trump is now illegally hiding. We will be covering that story tonight.
The Greenland obsession is not new. Trump first floated the idea of purchasing the territory more than 6 years ago. It received extensive media coverage then, and it's receiving extensive media coverage now. And that, according to numerous analysts, is precisely the point. Consider the strategic function of this recurring Greenland narrative. It's simple enough for cable news to cover endlessly. It's provocative enough to generate headlines. And most importantly, it's a distraction from stories that pose far more serious legal and political threats to Trump's presidency. Every network minute devoted to analyzing whether America might somehow acquire Greenland is a minute not spent examining other developing stories. The Epstein document case represents one such story. Federal records related to Jeffrey Epstein, which Trump's Justice Department now controls, have reportedly been withheld from public release. More than 99% of these files remain hidden from public view, according to recent reporting, despite calls for transparency. Then there's Venezuela. Trump's administration deployed what officials described as invasion forces to address the regime there. Yet the same government that was in power before those forces arrived remains in power today. The operation, whatever its actual scope, did not achieve its stated objective of regime change. And domestically, federal forces have been deployed to cities including Minneapolis, jurisdictions that notably did not deliver electoral victories for Trump. The constitutional implications of using federal law enforcement in this manner remain deeply contested. All of these stories compete for limited media attention and public focus. Greenland crowds them out. It's accessible, it's shocking, and it requires no deep investigative reporting to cover. It's the perfect distraction, and it appears to be functioning exactly as designed.
Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary, who is by far the most incompetent Treasury Secretary in history, once again faced Sunday morning questions yesterday that he just could not answer.
If the United States were to take Greenland by force, how would that be different than Russia's annexation of Crimea?
Look, I believe that the Europeans will understand that this is best for Greenland, best for Europe, and best for the United States.
That man is going to spend the rest of his life claiming that he saved us from Donald Trump's worst impulses.
The Treasury Secretary's performance on Sunday morning political programming offered a window into the impossible position Trump's cabinet members find themselves occupying. When pressed on how American acquisition of Greenland by force would differ from Russia's annexation of Crimea, a violation of international law that the United States condemned and sanctioned, the Secretary simply could not provide a coherent answer. His response attempted to sidestep the entire framework of the question, suggesting instead that Europeans would eventually understand such an action as beneficial. This is a Treasury Secretary who has already established himself as arguably the least qualified person ever to hold that position, now tasked with defending the legally and diplomatically indefensible. He's not alone. Marco Rubio and virtually every other Trump cabinet official will likely spend the remainder of their careers insisting they served as moderating influences, that they prevented Trump's worst impulses from becoming reality. They will claim credit for disasters that didn't happen, while deflecting responsibility for those that did. The Secretary of Labor won't be making such claims, primarily because there's scant evidence she maintains any meaningful contact with the president. Most Americans wouldn't even know her identity were it not for recent New York Post reporting detailing an Inspector General investigation. That probe has allegedly uncovered highly irregular conduct, including alcohol storage in her office and inappropriate outings with subordinates to adult entertainment venues. The investigation has also reportedly confirmed internal discussions months ago about the secretary pursuing an inappropriate relationship with an employee, allegations that her chief of staff allegedly dismissed. That chief of staff, along with his deputy, have now been placed on administrative leave. The secretary has denied all wrongdoing through her attorney, and the Labor Department has declined to comment on the ongoing investigation. This is the environment in which Trump's government operates: scandal, dysfunction, and constitutional crisis existing simultaneously across multiple agencies. The Supreme Court now finds itself in an extraordinarily difficult position, though it's a position largely of its own making. For months, certain justices, particularly Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, along with at least some of Trump's own appointees, have been working to construct a legal framework that would validate Trump's tariff regime. There's just one insurmountable problem. The tariffs are unconstitutional, and a specialized federal court has already said so unanimously. The Court of International Trade exists precisely for cases like this. Unlike the Supreme Court, whose justices are generalists handling everything from abortion rights to environmental regulations, the Court of International Trade focuses exclusively on one subject: international trade law. That's their entire jurisdiction. They are the nation's foremost experts on the constitutional limits of presidential tariff authority, and they ruled unanimously that Trump's tariff approach violates the Constitution. Unanimously. That unanimous panel included 2 judges that Trump himself appointed. This wasn't a partisan split decision. It was a comprehensive rejection by the court most qualified to make such determinations. The court's language was unusually stark. They wrote that allowing the president to impose any tariff rate he desires on any nation at any time, for virtually any reason, would, quote, sound the death knell of the Constitution. Those are extraordinary words from a federal court. They signal that this isn't a technical dispute over tariff schedules or trade law minutiae. It's a fundamental question about whether constitutional limits on executive power still exist. That ruling is now before the Supreme Court, after Trump appealed. And if you're a Supreme Court justice who spent months trying to figure out how to rule in Trump's favor without completely abandoning constitutional principles, the absolute last thing you wanted was for Trump to keep imposing new, even more outrageous tariffs while your deliberations continued. Samuel Alito and others needed Trump to simply remain quiet on tariffs until they issued their ruling. They needed him to stop providing evidence of exactly the kind of unlimited executive authority that the Court of International Trade warned about. Trump's Solicitor General, the lawyer who argued the case before the Supreme Court, certainly hoped Trump would exercise some restraint during this critical period. But restraint is not in Donald Trump's vocabulary. Instead, this past Saturday, Trump issued what may be his most deranged tariff threat yet. He announced that beginning February 1st, 8 European nations, including Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, would face a 10% tariff on all goods exported to the United States. Then, on June 1st, that rate would automatically increase to 25%. And here's the truly unhinged part. These tariffs would remain in place indefinitely until those nations agree to, quote, the complete and total purchase of Greenland. Think about what this means from a legal standpoint. Trump is attempting to use American tariff authority not to protect domestic industries, not to address unfair trade practices, but to extort foreign governments into selling territory they don't even fully control. Greenland is a self-governing territory within Denmark. Denmark can't simply sell it even if Denmark wanted to, which Denmark emphatically does not. Imagine being a Supreme Court clerk, having spent months attempting to twist constitutional text into shapes that might somehow accommodate Trump's previous tariff overreach. You've probably sacrificed your intellectual integrity, certainly your credibility among constitutional scholars. And then Trump obliterates whatever fragile legal theory you'd constructed with a single social media post announcing tariffs as a tool of territorial conquest. This is governing as dementia. It's policy-making unmoored from reality, law, or rational calculation. It demonstrates a mind that is not simply reckless, but possibly no longer capable of distinguishing between fantasy and governmental authority. The humiliation of working for Donald Trump was on full display during another moment in the Treasury Secretary's Sunday morning interview. Axios had reported that Bessent privately expressed deep concern to Trump about the administration's decision to launch a federal investigation into Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. According to that reporting, citing 2 sources familiar with the conversation, Bessent told Trump that investigating the Fed chair was creating a mess and could destabilize financial markets. When confronted with this reporting on air, Bessent's response encapsulated everything pathetic about serving in Trump's cabinet. He said, and these were his exact words, "I'm not going to discuss my conversations with the president, but if I said that, I was wrong. If I said that, I was wrong. Not, that reporting is inaccurate. Not, I stand by my advice. Not even a simple, no comment. Instead, a preemptive surrender. An acknowledgement that even if he did express concerns about Trump's unconstitutional and economically reckless investigation of the Federal Reserve, even if he did fulfill his obligation as Treasury Secretary to warn about threats to market stability, he was wrong to do so. This is the most pathetic statement ever publicly uttered by a cabinet secretary who was already fully humiliated, and it raises profound personal questions. Scott Bessent and his husband, John Freeman, are raising 2 children together. How do they explain this moment to those kids? How do their children process watching their father abase himself on national television, repudiating his own professional judgment in real time? What lesson is being taught here? What does this moment convey to children about integrity, about standing up for what you believe is right, about maintaining dignity under pressure? And the lesson extends beyond the Bessent household. It's a lesson about the Trump cabinet as an institution, about the Trump-controlled Congress, about the Supreme Court justices who seem to function more as Trump's legal team than as independent jurists. Anne Applebaum, writing in The Atlantic, recently published a piece titled, "Trump's Letter to Norway Should Be the Last Straw." She's arguing that for people like Scott Bessent, for the Republicans in Congress who enable Trump, for anyone still claiming they're serving as guardrails or moderating influences, this latest episode should represent a breaking point. But here's the tragedy. There is no last straw. We've learned this over 9 years of Trump in public life. There's always another humiliation, another constitutional violation, another moment of profound unfitness for office. And there's always someone willing to defend it, excuse it, or pretend it didn't happen. Scott Bessent will continue showing up for his Sunday morning ritual humiliation. Marco Rubio will keep insisting that Trump's inflammatory rhetoric doesn't represent actual policy. Supreme Court justices will continue searching for ways to validate the invalid, and members of Congress will keep voting for measures they know are destructive, unconstitutional, or both. Mary Trump's assessment that this latest letter is too stupid even for him suggests there should be some floor, some level of incompetence or confusion that even Trump cannot breach. But nearly a decade of evidence suggests otherwise. There is no bottom. There is no moment where the absurdity becomes so overwhelming that it forces a reckoning. The Greenland fantasy will continue. The tariff threats will escalate. The constitutional violations will multiply. And the same cast of enablers will remain in their positions, each convincing themselves that they're somehow mitigating the damage, even as they facilitate it. This is American governance in 2026. A president who may not know that Norway and Denmark are different countries, threatening illegal tariffs to acquire territory that isn't for sale, supported by a cabinet too afraid to tell him no, and a Supreme Court preparing to rewrite the Constitution to accommodate his delusions. The question isn't whether this is too stupid even for Trump. The question is whether it's too stupid for us to keep pretending it's normal.